The crystal chandelier above Marcus Blackwood's mahogany desk cast fractured light across the termination letter he'd just signed. His pen hovered over the paper, gold-plated and heavy with the weight of decision. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered like a kingdom he'd conquered with his own hands, 37 floors of steel and ambition that bore his name. But right now, his focus was on the woman standing before him, trembling despite her efforts to appear composed. "Late again, Mrs. Chen," Marcus said, his voice cold enough to frost the morning air. "That makes 5 times this month." Elena Chen stood with her hands clasped in front of her worn uniform, the fabric threadbare at the elbows despite her meticulous care. At 42, she looked older. Exhaustion had carved premature lines around her eyes, and her once lustrous black hair now showed streaks of premature gray. But it was her eyes that held something Marcus couldn't quite name, a fierce determination wrapped in desperation. "Mr. Blackwood, please," she began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "I don't pay you to make excuses, Mrs. Chen. I pay you to be here at 6 a.m. sharp."
"Not 6:15. Not 6:30. 6 a.m.
He enunciated each word like hammer strikes. "My grandfather built this company on discipline and punctuality. Those aren't just words to me, they're sacred principles." Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, studying her the way he might examine a failing investment. Elena Chen had been his head housekeeper for 3 years, managing his penthouse with an attention to detail that bordered on artistic. She knew he took his coffee at exactly 185 degrees, that his shirts needed to be pressed with botanical starch, and that the fresh lilies in the foyer had to be replaced every Tuesday and Friday. She was, in every measurable way, exceptional at her job. Except for this one glaring failure. "Do you have any idea how many people would kill for your position?" Marcus continued, rising from his chair. At 6'3", he used his height the way other men used weapons. "I have a waiting list of candidates who would arrive at 5:30 a.m. just to prove their dedication." Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly.
"I understand, sir.
"It won't happen again."
You're right. It won't."
Marcus picked up the termination letter, the paper crisp between his fingers. "Because I'm letting you go. Effective immediately." The color drained from Elena's face. For a moment, she swayed on her feet, and Marcus wondered if she might actually faint. Part of him, a very small part he'd learned to ignore years ago, felt the stirring of guilt. But he'd built his empire by making hard decisions, by refusing to let emotion cloud his judgment. "Mr. Blackwood," Elena's voice cracked, and she cleared her throat, visibly gathering herself.
"Please. I need this job. You don't understand."
"I understand perfectly." Marcus walked around his desk, maintaining the power dynamic.
"You have obligations. We all do.
But that doesn't excuse chronic tardiness. I've given you warning after warning. I've been more than fair."
"Fair."
The word escaped Elena's lips before she could stop it. Something flashed in her eyes, anger maybe or just pure exhaustion pushed past its breaking point. "You call this fair?" Marcus's eyebrows rose. In 3 years, Elena Chen had never raised her voice, never questioned him, never showed anything but respectful deference. This tiny spark of defiance caught him off guard.
"Excuse me."
His voice dropped to a dangerous register. Elena seemed to realize she'd crossed a line. Her shoulders sagged, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper.
"Nothing, sir. I apologize."
But Marcus had seen it, that flash of something real beneath her carefully maintained professional mask. It intrigued him despite himself, like finding a crack in marble you'd thought was flawless. "I'll need your keys," he said, extending his hand. "Security will escort you out. You'll receive 2 weeks severance, which is more than generous given the circumstances." Elena's fingers trembled as she worked the keys off her ring. The penthouse key, the service entrance key, the key to his wine cellar that he'd entrusted to her alone. She placed them in his palm one by one, each small surrender seeming to cost her something vital. "The severance will be directly deposited," Marcus continued, already mentally moving on to his next task. He had a board meeting at 9, lunch with investors at noon, and a gala that evening where he needed to charm potential partners. Elena Chen was already becoming a footnote in his day. "You'll need to sign the exit paperwork with HR." "Mr. Blackwood." Elena's voice stopped him as he turned back toward his desk. "May I ask you something?" He glanced at his Patek Philippe watch, $280,000 worth of Swiss precision telling him he was already running behind schedule. "Make it quick." "Have you ever had to choose between your job and someone's life?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus frowned, irritation flickering across his perfectly composed features. That's not relevant to. Because that's what I've been doing.
Elena's voice was steady now, resigned. Every single morning.
I've been choosing, and I chose wrong. I chose the job when I should have, but I needed the money for. She stopped abruptly, pressing her lips together.
For what?
Marcus asked, hating himself for his curiosity. Elena shook her head. It doesn't matter now. You've made your decision. She turned to leave, her worn shoes silent on his imported Italian marble. Something about the way she moved, with dignity despite defeat, with grace despite devastation, made Marcus uncomfortable in a way he couldn't articulate.
Mrs. Chen.
She paused at the door but didn't turn around. I hope you find a position more suited to your circumstances. It was meant to be kind, or at least neutral. But even Marcus heard how hollow it sounded, how utterly inadequate. Elena's shoulders stiffened.
Thank you, sir.
I hope you find someone who can make your coffee exactly right. Then she was gone, the door clicking shut with a finality that somehow felt more significant than it should have. Marcus stood alone in his palatial office, surrounded by the trappings of success. Original Rothkos on the walls, a sculpture by Sarah in the corner, Persian rugs worth more than most people's cars. He'd built all of this through discipline, through hard work, through refusing to accept excuses. So why did he feel like he'd just made a terrible mistake? He shook off the thought and pressed the intercom. Jennifer, call the agency. I need a new head housekeeper by tomorrow morning. Make sure they understand punctuality is non-negotiable. Yes, Mr. Blackwood, his assistant's voice crackled back. Marcus returned to his desk, pulling up the quarterly reports that needed his attention. Within minutes, Elena Chen had faded from his thoughts, just another operational problem solved, another personnel issue handled. But that would change. 3 days later, Marcus stood in his penthouse kitchen at 6:17 a.m., staring at the worst cup of coffee he'd ever been served. The new housekeeper, a nervous woman named Martha who'd arrived with impeccable references, had somehow managed to burn it, make it too weak, and serve it at room temperature all at once. This is unacceptable, Marcus said, dumping the entire cup down the sink. Martha wrung her hands. I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood. I'll make a new pot right away. How do you like it exactly? The way Mrs. Chen made it, he snapped, then immediately regretted the outburst. Martha wasn't Elena. She didn't know his preferences with that almost uncanny intuition. She didn't move through his space like she understood the rhythm of his life. Over the next week, the differences compounded. His shirts were pressed incorrectly, leaving creases in the wrong places. The lilies in the foyer were the wrong shade, too pale, not the creamy white Elena always selected. His study, which used to smell faintly of lemon polish and leather, now reeked of chemical cleaners that gave him headaches. She's incompetent, Marcus complained to his assistant Jennifer during their daily briefing. How did someone with her references turn out to be so inadequate? Jennifer, who'd worked for Marcus for 8 years and had learned to navigate his moods like a seasoned sailor reads weather patterns, chose her words carefully. Mrs. Chen was exceptional, sir. She'd been with you for 3 years and knew your preferences intimately. Perhaps Martha just needs time to learn. I don't have time, Marcus said, signing off on a contract without really reading it, something the old Marcus would never have done. Everything is off. My entire routine is disrupted. If I may, sir, Jennifer ventured, have you considered that Mrs. Chen might be willing to return? Perhaps if you reached out.
No.
The word came out harder than Marcus intended.
She was chronically late.
I made the right decision.
But had he?
The question nagged at him as he dressed for the annual Children's Hospital charity gala that evening. It was one of the few charitable obligations Marcus actually cared about. His mother had been a pediatric nurse before she passed away when he was 12. He'd endowed an entire wing in her name and sat on the hospital's board of directors. The gala was held at the Plaza Hotel, a glittering affair where Manhattan's elite gathered to see and be seen while writing checks for a good cause. Marcus arrived fashionably late, his custom Tom Ford tuxedo drawing appreciative glances as he worked the room with practiced charm.
Marcus. Darling.
Constance Whitmore, a silver-haired socialite who'd known his grandfather, swept up in a cloud of expensive perfume. The Blackwood wing is looking absolutely magnificent. Dr. Reeves was just telling me about the new equipment you've donated. Marcus smiled, the expression not quite reaching his eyes. It's the least I could do. Pediatric care was my mother's passion. As Constance launched into a story about her own charitable endeavors, Marcus found his attention wandering across the ballroom. That's when he saw it, a flash of worn fabric that looked distinctly out of place among the couture gowns and designer suits.
No. It couldn't be. But it was.
Elena Chen stood near the hors d'oeuvres table, looking simultaneously out of place and utterly exhausted. She wore what appeared to be her only formal dress, a simple black number that had probably been nice 20 years ago but now looked tired and outdated. But it wasn't her clothing that struck Marcus like a physical blow.
It was her face.
In the week since he'd fired her, Elena seemed to have aged years. Her cheeks were hollow, dark circles like bruises beneath her eyes. Her hands, when she reached for a glass of water, shook with obvious tremor. "Excuse me, Constance," Marcus said abruptly, already moving across the ballroom. Elena didn't notice his approach. She was focused on a conversation with Dr. Reeves, the hospital's chief of pediatric oncology. Marcus slowed his steps, close enough to hear but not to be noticed. "Truly grateful for everything the staff has done," Elena was saying, her voice thick with emotion. "Dr. Martinez, especially. She's been wonderful with Lily." "Your daughter is remarkably brave," Dr. Reeves replied gently. "The treatment for leukemia is difficult for anyone, but for a child."
He shook his head.
"I want you to know that regardless of your insurance situation, we're not going to stop Lily's treatment. The Blackwood wing has funding specifically for families in financial hardship."
Marcus froze. Leukemia. Lily.
Financial hardship. The pieces crashed together in his mind with sickening clarity. Elena had a daughter with leukemia. She'd been late because what?
Hospital visits? Emergency calls? Treatment complications? And he'd fired her.
Fired her for being late. Fired her when her daughter was fighting cancer. "I don't want charity," Elena was saying firmly, despite the tears now streaming down her face.
"I'll pay every cent. I've already picked up 2 more jobs.
I clean offices from midnight to 4 a.m., and I do laundry service in the afternoons. I'll make it work." "Mrs. Chen," Dr. Reeves said gently, "you can't keep this pace. You're going to collapse." "Then I'll collapse after Lily is well."
Elena's voice broke. "She's all I have, doctor.
Her father left when she was diagnosed. Said he couldn't handle it. So it's just me and her. And I cannot let her down." Marcus stood paralyzed, his champagne glass forgotten in his hand. He thought about the termination letter he'd signed so casually. The lecture he'd given about discipline and punctuality. His complete, utter blindness to the fact that Elena Chen was living through hell itself. He thought about asking if she had obligations, and her simple response, "We all do." She hadn't made excuses because she hadn't wanted his pity. She'd tried to keep her private catastrophe separate from her professional life. She'd shown up every single day despite having every reason not to, just a few minutes late, struggling to balance the impossible demands of keeping her job and keeping vigil at her dying daughter's bedside. And he'd fired her for it. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, something he'd spent years building walls around. It wasn't just guilt, though guilt was certainly there, sharp and acidic. It was the sudden horrifying realization that he'd become so focused on his principles, his rules, his empire, that he'd lost sight of the basic human being standing in front of him. Elena was excusing herself from Dr. Reeves now, heading toward the exit with hunched shoulders. Marcus knew he should let her go. What could he possibly say? An apology would be insultingly inadequate. An offer of help would seem like conscience money. But then he remembered her question, "Have you ever had to choose between your job and someone's life?" And his non-answer. His complete dismissal of what she'd been trying to tell him. Marcus Blackwood had built an empire on being right, on making hard decisions without looking back. But standing in that glittering ballroom, surrounded by people who would never face the kind of choice Elena Chen made every single day, he knew with absolute certainty. He had been wrong. So completely, utterly, catastrophically wrong. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Marcus's feet moved before his brain fully caught up with his decision. He weaved through clusters of donors and socialites, their laughter and champagne-fueled conversations fading to white noise as he pursued Elena's retreating figure. She was heading toward the grand staircase that led to the plaza's main entrance, moving with the careful deliberation of someone running on fumes.
"Mrs. Chen."
His voice cut through the ambient noise, sharper than he intended. Elena froze mid-step, her hand gripping the marble balustrade. For a moment, Marcus thought she might simply keep walking, pretending she hadn't heard him. He wouldn't have blamed her. But slowly, so slowly it seemed to pain her, she turned around. Up close, she looked even worse than she had from across the ballroom. Her eyes were red-rimmed and glassy, her skin had a grayish pallor that spoke of missed meals and sleepless nights. When she recognized him, something flickered across her face, fear maybe or just exhaustion too deep to hide behind professionalism anymore. "Mr. Blackwood." Her voice was flat, empty of inflection. I didn't know you'd be here. I sit on the hospital's board, Marcus said, then immediately felt stupid for stating something so obvious.
He cleared his throat.
I overheard your conversation with Dr. Reeves. Elena's composure cracked visibly. Color flooded her cheeks. Shame, Marcus realized with a twist of his gut. She was ashamed that he'd discovered her situation. I should go, she said quickly, turning back toward the stairs. I have a shift at the laundry service in an hour, and I need to check on Lily first.
Wait.
Marcus reached out, stopping just short of touching her arm.
Please.
Just 5 minutes. Elena's shoulders sagged with the weight of defeat. What do you want from me, Mr. Blackwood? You've already taken my job. What else is there? The words hit him like physical blows.
I want to understand.
Your daughter, Lily, she has leukemia. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, Elena confirmed, her voice mechanical, reciting facts she'd probably spoken 1,000 times to doctors and insurance companies and bill collectors. Diagnosed 14 months ago. She's 8 years old. She was responding well to treatment initially, but then she relapsed 6 months ago. Now she needs a bone marrow transplant.
Marcus felt his chest tighten.
And you didn't tell me. Elena's laugh was bitter, hollow. Tell you what, exactly? Sorry I'm 15 minutes late, Mr. Blackwood, but my daughter was vomiting blood this morning from her chemotherapy. I apologize for my tardiness, sir, but I spent the night in the ER because Lily's fever spiked to 104. She shook her head, and Marcus saw tears threatening to spill over. You made it very clear what you valued, Mr. Blackwood.
Punctuality. Discipline.
Sacred principles. My daughter's life didn't factor into your equation. That's not fair, Marcus started then stopped.
Because it was fair. Completely fair.
He'd created an environment where Elena felt she couldn't share the most devastating crisis of her life for fear of losing her income. He'd been so rigid in his expectations that she'd chosen to suffer in silence rather than ask for understanding. You're right, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Elena blinked, clearly not expecting an apology. It doesn't matter now. It does matter. Mrs. Chen, Elena, I had no idea what you were dealing with. If I had known. If you had known, what? Elena interrupted, and now the anger was clear in her voice, burning through the exhaustion. Would you have made an exception? Been flexible with someone whose daughter is dying? Or would you have fired me anyway because principles are principles, and businesses can't run on exceptions? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. Because he honestly didn't know the answer. The old Marcus, the one who'd signed that termination letter, would have said that personal problems couldn't interfere with professional obligations. That rules existed for a reason. That success came from unwavering discipline. But standing here now, looking at a woman who'd been quietly carrying an unbearable burden while maintaining his pristine penthouse and making his perfect coffee, he felt the inadequacy of his entire worldview. I would like to think I would have been more understanding, he finally said. But you're probably right not to believe me. I've given you no reason to. Elena studied him with those exhausted, ancient eyes. Why are you even talking to me, Mr. Blackwood?
What do you want? I want to help.
I don't need your pity. It's not pity, Marcus insisted, though he wasn't entirely sure what it was.
Guilt, certainly.
But also something else, a desire to fix this, to make it right, to prove to himself that he wasn't the heartless corporate titan this situation was revealing him to be. You said the hospital won't stop treatment, but you're working 3 jobs to pay for it. Let me help with the bills.
No.
The word was immediate and absolute. I don't take charity, Mr. Blackwood. Not from you, not from anyone. It's not charity. Consider it back pay. Severance I should have given you.
Compensation for. For what?
For 3 years of service where I was apparently never good enough because I couldn't arrive on time while my daughter was dying. Elena's voice rose, and several nearby patrons turned to look. She lowered her tone, but the intensity remained. I don't want your money, Mr. Blackwood. I want to work for it. I want to earn it. I want to look my daughter in the eye and tell her that I did everything I could, that I fought for every cent that's keeping her alive. Then work for it, Marcus heard himself say.
Come back.
I'll rehire you. Elena laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. So you can fire me again the next time I'm late? No thank you. I'll be flexible about the hours. You can come in whenever. I don't want flexibility. Elena's composure finally shattered completely.
Don't you understand?
I don't want special treatment or exceptions or pity-driven flexibility. I want to be able to do my job well, to be valued for my work, not viewed as some charity case you keep around to feel better about yourself. She was breathing hard now, tears streaming down her face, months or maybe years of suppressed emotion finally erupting. Several gala attendees were openly staring now, whispering behind manicured hands. Marcus felt heat creep up his neck, embarrassment at the public scene, yes, but more than that, a deep shame at having pushed Elena to this breaking point. This woman who'd maintained such dignity, such professionalism despite impossible circumstances, was now breaking down in public because he'd cornered her with his inadequate attempts at redemption. "You're right," he said softly. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. I'll leave you alone." He turned to go, but Elena's voice stopped him. "Mr. Blackwood." He looked back. Elena was wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to collect herself. When she spoke, her voice was raw but steady. "You asked what I wanted from you. You want to know what would actually help." She reached into the small, worn purse she carried and pulled out a folded piece of paper, its edges soft from repeated handling. "This." She thrust it at him. Marcus took it carefully, unfolding the document with a strange sense of dread. It was a hospital bill. Not just any hospital bill, a summary statement of Lily Chen's treatment costs over the past 14 months. Marcus's eyes traveled down the list, each line item a small catastrophe: chemotherapy, sessions, bone marrow biopsies, genetic testing, radiation therapy, emergency room visits, specialized medications with names he couldn't pronounce. The numbers climbed higher and higher, figures that would have made even his wealthy friends blanch. And at the bottom, in bold, unforgiving print: total amount due, $847,392.18. Amount paid by insurance, $243,100. Patient responsibility, $604,292.18. Marcus stared at the numbers, his mind struggling to process them. $600,000. More than $500,000 in debt for trying to save a child's life. "That's what it costs to keep an 8-year-old alive," Elena said quietly. "That's why I worked for you. That's why I picked up 2 more jobs. That's why I was late, Mr. Blackwood, because I was spending every spare moment on the phone with insurance companies, negotiating payment plans, selling everything I own, and still falling further behind every single day." Marcus looked up from the bill, seeing Elena with completely new eyes. She wasn't just late. She was drowning. Drowning while trying to maintain the illusion that everything was fine, that she was a competent professional who just needed to try a little harder, be a little faster, sacrifice a little more. "And that number?" Elena continued, her voice hollow. "That's not even everything. Lily needs a bone marrow transplant. None of her immediate family is a match. We're on the registry, but finding a donor could take months or years, time Lily might not have. There's an option for a haploidentical transplant, which means we could use a half match from a parent. That's me. But that procedure." She laughed again, that awful brittle sound. "That's another $500,000 to $800,000. And my insurance, what's left of it, will cover maybe 40% if I'm lucky." Marcus felt the weight of the paper in his hands, this document that represented not just numbers but a child's life measured in currency, a mother's love quantified in debt. "I had a house," Elena said quietly. "A little place in Queens. My grandmother left it to me. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I sold it 9 months ago to pay for treatment. We live in a studio apartment now, above a restaurant. The smell of cooking oil seeps through the walls, and Lily's coughs echo because there's no furniture left to absorb the sound. I sold everything, Mr. Blackwood. The furniture, the jewelry my mother gave me, my wedding ring from a marriage that failed. I sold it all." She looked at him with eyes that held no hope, no expectation, just the terrible, exhausted truth of her existence. "So when you ask what you can do to help, what I want from you, I don't want anything. Because there's nothing you can give me that will fix this. There's no amount of flexible hours or back pay or charitable donations that will make a dent in this mountain of debt while my daughter is dying. The only thing that will help Lily is a miracle, and those don't come from billionaires feeling guilty about firing their maid." The words hung in the air between them, brutal and honest. Around them, the gala continued, champagne flowing, laughter ringing, people in expensive clothes celebrating their generosity while Elena Chen stood before Marcus Blackwood, holding the sum of her catastrophe in a piece of paper that would be replaced next month by an even larger number. Marcus looked down at the bill again. $600,000. To him, that was a rounding error on his quarterly taxes. He'd spent more than that on the sculpture in his office corner, on the vintage wine collection in his cellar, on the custom suits that hung in his walk-in closet. But to Elena, it was everything. It was her house, her possessions, her dignity, her future, all sacrificed on the altar of loving her daughter enough to bankrupt herself trying to keep her alive. What's her prognosis? Marcus asked quietly. If she gets the transplant? Elena's expression softened slightly, the only time that evening Marcus had seen anything other than exhaustion or anger on her face. With a successful transplant and no complications? Dr. Reeves says 70 to 80% 5-year survival rate. She could live, Mr. Blackwood. She could grow up. She could have a life. And without it? Elena's mask of composure threatened to crumble again.
6 months. Maybe less.
The cancer is aggressive. The chemotherapy is buying us time, but not much.
6 months.
Marcus thought about what he'd been doing 6 months ago. A merger in Tokyo. A speaking engagement in London. A weekend in the Hamptons where he'd complained about the quality of the lobster. Meaningless, forgettable moments while Elena Chen was racing against a clock that was counting down her daughter's life. I need to meet her, Marcus said suddenly. Elena's eyes widened. What?
Lily.
I need to meet her.
No.
Elena's response was immediate and fierce, maternal protection flaring like a wall between them.
Absolutely not.
I won't have you treating her like some charity case you're evaluating, deciding if she's worthy of your help. That's not. Marcus stopped, chose his words more carefully.
You're right. That's not fair to her.
But Mrs. Chen, Elena, I can help. I can pay for the transplant, the hospital bills, everything. I have the resources. And I have my pride.
Elena cut him off.
I told you. I don't want charity. It's not charity if you work for it, Marcus countered.
Come back. Work for me. I'll pay you double, triple.
Whatever it takes to help you pay down this debt. Elena shook her head slowly.
You don't understand.
Even at triple my old salary, it would take me 30 years to pay off what I owe now, and that's not counting the transplant. The math doesn't work, Mr. Blackwood. No amount of wages you pay me will ever be enough.
She was right, of course.
Marcus knew enough about numbers to see the impossible equation. But there had to be a solution, some way to fix this that didn't involve simply writing a check, because he understood now that Elena would never accept that. She'd rather work herself to death than take what she saw as handouts. Then let me hire you for something else, Marcus said, the idea forming even as he spoke. Something that justifies the kind of compensation that could actually help. Do you have any other skills? Business experience?
Education.
Elena's expression turned incredulous. I'm a housekeeper, Mr. Blackwood. Before that, I worked retail. I have an associate's degree in English literature that I never finished because I got pregnant and my husband, ex-husband, convinced me I didn't need to work. When he left, housekeeping was the best job I could find that worked around Lily's schedule.
She shook her head.
I don't have skills that are worth 6-figure salaries. I don't have an MBA or connections or anything that would justify you paying me enough to make a real difference. And even if I did, we both know you'd be creating a fake position just to funnel money to me. That's still charity, just with extra steps. Marcus felt frustration building, not at Elena, but at the situation, at the impossible bind she was in. She was right on every count. Any position he created would be transparent charity. But watching her stand there, holding that devastating bill, knowing she had a daughter fighting for her life while drowning in debt that no amount of honest work could ever overcome.
He couldn't just walk away. Not anymore.
Not after seeing what his blindness had cost her. There has to be something, he insisted. Some way I can help that you'll actually accept. Elena looked at him for a long moment, and Marcus saw the war playing out behind her eyes. Pride versus desperation, dignity versus love for her daughter. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. There is one thing.
Name it.
The hospital's donor registry. The bone marrow registry. Elena's hands twisted around the strap of her purse. They need more donors, especially for Asian patients. Lily is half Chinese, half white. That makes finding a match incredibly difficult. The more people who register, the better her chances, and the chances of other patients like her. She looked up at Marcus, and for the first time that evening, he saw something other than exhaustion or anger in her eyes. He saw hope, fragile and desperate.
You have influence, resources, connections.
If you really want to help, organize a drive.
Get people to register.
Rich people, poor people, anyone willing to swab their cheek and potentially save a life. You could reach people I never could. You could make a real difference, not just for Lily, but for hundreds of other children waiting for a miracle. Marcus stood silent, processing her request. She wasn't asking for money. She wasn't even asking for help specific to her daughter. She was asking him to do something that might not benefit Lily at all, but could help others in the same impossible situation. It was, he realized, the most selfless thing he'd ever heard someone ask for. "I'll do it," he said immediately. "I'll organize the biggest donor drive this city has ever seen. I'll use every connection I have. I'll..." "And get tested yourself," Elena interrupted quietly.
Marcus blinked. "What? Get tested?"
"Register as a donor. If you're going to ask other people to do it, you should be willing to do it yourself." Elena held his gaze steadily. "Show people that everyone can make a difference. Even billionaires who fire their maids for being late." The barb landed, intentional and deserved.
But Marcus nodded.
"I'll be the first one to register."
"Thank you."
Elena's voice cracked slightly. "That means more than I can say." She turned to go, but Marcus called after her one more time. "Mrs. Chen, Elena, will you at least let me know how the drive goes? If we find matches? If Lily gets better." Elena paused on the stairs, not turning around. For a moment, Marcus thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly he almost missed it.
"We'll see."
Then she was gone, disappearing into the Manhattan night, carrying the weight of that impossible bill and an even heavier burden. The knowledge that her daughter's life hung in the balance of statistics and genetics and the mercy of strangers. Marcus stood alone in the grand foyer of the Plaza Hotel, still holding the photocopy of the hospital bill. Behind him, the gala continued, oblivious.
A quartet played Vivaldi. Champagne clinked. People laughed.
And Marcus Blackwood, who'd built an empire on unwavering principles and iron discipline, felt those foundations crack and shift beneath his feet. Because he'd just learned that all his success, all his wealth, all his carefully constructed rules about punctuality and performance, none of it meant a damn thing when measured against a mother's desperate love for her dying child. He looked down at the bill one more time, at the impossible numbers that would haunt Elena Chen for the rest of her life. Then he carefully folded it, placed it in his jacket pocket over his heart, and pulled out his phone. "Jennifer," he said when his assistant answered on the first ring. "I need you to clear my calendar for the next month."
"Everything."
"I have something more important to do."
"Sir?"
"But the merger meetings."
"Postpone them. Delegate them. I don't care."
Marcus was already walking toward the exit, his mind spinning with plans and possibilities. "I need you to contact every major media outlet in the city. I need meeting with the hospital's donor registry coordinator. And I need you to organize the biggest donor registration drive New York has ever seen." There was a pause on the other end. "May I ask what this is about, sir?" Marcus stepped out into the December night, the cold air sharp against his face. Somewhere in this city, in a studio apartment that smelled of cooking oil, a little girl named Lily Chen was fighting for her life. And her mother, his former employee, the woman he'd fired for being late to make his coffee, was fighting just as hard, armed with nothing but love and impossible hope. "It's about being late for the right reasons," Marcus said quietly. "And learning what really matters when everything else is stripped away." He hung up before Jennifer could ask for clarification, because he wasn't entirely sure he could explain it anyway. All he knew was that something fundamental had shifted inside him tonight. The carefully constructed walls around his heart, walls built from grief over his mother's death, from his grandfather's harsh lessons about business, from years of choosing success over humanity, had finally cracked wide enough to let the light in. And what that light revealed wasn't pretty. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become someone better than the man who'd signed that termination letter. Maybe it wasn't too late to save a life, and in doing so, save his own soul.